Welcome back, everybody. Today we are joined again by Dr. Pietro Shakarian, a lecturer in history at the American University of Armenia in Yerevan. Pietro, welcome back.
Pascal, it's a pleasure to be on your show once again. Thank you for having me. And Happy New Year, too.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Happy New Year, yeah. Happy New Year, yeah.
Although I must say, it doesn't start very happily, but that's what we need to talk about.
No, it does not start very happily, no.
We are having now Venezuela, but I wanted to talk to you because you wrote actually a piece about Iran and Iran's relationship with Russia. But I do think what's happening in Venezuela is now probably going to impact Iran quite a bit. Could you maybe give us your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think what happened in Venezuela is a crime, against humanity, a crime against international law. I mean, it's just like it's absolutely insane to me. Actually, we can even say that, well, the Iraq War, as terrible as that was, at least Bush attempted to go to the UN. This is not even, Trump isn't even doing that. Trump is just like going out, to take out the leader, straightforward. I mean, this is just atrocious. What can I say? I mean, I think, yeah, it's a disaster, and I think also it's a warning to Iran about really the agenda of the Trump administration. So despite kind of, again, the rhetoric we got when Trump was running for election, that, I'm the peace president, right? That America first, and I'm gonna, have our kind of, I guess you could say, come home moments, right? That we're not gonna have forever wars, right? Even he brought in Tulsi Gabbard into the administration. And now, and by the way, Tulsi Gabbard, who condemned, these kind of regime change attempts in Venezuela earlier. And now what we have is a Trump that really it's kind of the imperialism. As he said, it's imperialism locked and loaded, right? He uses this term with reference to Iran because also there now recently have been protests in Iran that seem to be kind of, again, drumming up, or I guess you could say softening up Iran for a new round of conflict with Israel. So that's what we're seeing right now. I think that it's completely, it's completely atrocious and illegal. And what can you say about that, Pascal? I mean, it's like throwing out the whole international order post World War II.
Yeah. Although I must say, other people I made the argument. Peter Labelle made the argument in another podcast yesterday that, look, the liberals pretending that this is the first time ever that the United States does something against international law is laughable, right? I mean, this is a very old kind of tradition, especially in South America, for the U.S. to just go in, take them out, drug of law enforcement, whatever.
Going back decades, as we know. I could list you several examples of this. We have the Bay of Pigs invasion. We also have, the what happened with Allende, right? The insertion of Mr. Pinochet in Chile. So there's a long and bloody history. I mean, we have also the School of the Americas, right? So the American history in Latin America, or maybe you could say, I guess, to use a Frank Lloyd Wright term, Usonian. The Usonian, or the American record in Latin America, is not so bright, as it were. It's very dark. And with Iran, the implications are very straightforward. If I was watching this in Tehran, I would be taking notes because it's not good. Also, what's also interesting, I want to mention, though, Pascal, really quick, I'm sorry, excuse me, is how the so-called liberal leadership in the EU is praising Trump for this, because they say, well, this is justified because we never recognize Maduro as a legitimate president. Okay, well, that's fine for you. But the problem is, at the end of the day, it's completely illegal for one country. That's Venezuela's business, right? If Maduro is illegitimate in the eyes of some Venezuelans, they can protest, they can, have a new election, whatever. But it's not correct for another country, a superpower, to get involved directly in the affairs of another country. So the EU trying to go through Olympic, gymnastics to justify what's going on is really quite
Yeah.
despicable, and it says a lot about the current state of the EU. To say nothing of also what the British are saying. You're hearing statements coming out of the UK that, well, this is completely justified because it corresponds with the rules-based order. I don't know what in the hell. I don't know what rules-based order that they're talking about.
We must, it must be very clear, rules-based international order is a term but that was completely utterly made up by the Americans, more or less came into vogue under Mr. Biden. It is the rules-based international order is not a thing. International law is a thing, and international law, just for everybody to be clear on this, does not require a government to be democratic in order for it to be a subject of international law, for it to be recognized as another state. International law doesn't care, doesn't really
Also, yeah, absolutely,
how a state is run.
absolutely.
So they try to make that. They try to make you believe that this is the case. It's not. You can be a dictatorship and you're still a subject of international law with the same rights as everybody else. And this is not to say that we should have more dictatorships. We shouldn't. But it's just I mean, the Trump and so on, and the Europeans at the moment make you believe this, but it's just not true.
And also look at like the way in which, international law, I mean, in terms of how the international order is being run, that we want that now increasingly with multipolarity, we're having a more democratic, kind of world order. And the rules-based order, or at least the interpretation, I mean, if you, let's say, okay, let's be charitable and maybe say rules-based order, maybe we can say the rules are supposed to be the international law.
Yeah.
But that's not the interpretation that's taken in the United States. The idea of rules-based order is that, well, we make the rules.
Yeah.
And that we rule the roost here, and that, we have to enforce, our global hegemony over everybody else, right? Which is not very democratic at all.
We make the rules and order you to follow, and we change the rules whenever we want, especially when it is about ourselves. That's what it means. But that's what the Trump administration now asserts, and that's what they do, and that's just going to be a matter of fact, just as Israel is just implementing a genocide as a matter of
Absolutely,
fact. So,
absolutely, yeah.
other states are not dumb. They see this, they now understand, okay, the norms that we at least thought we have to pretend to adhere to, that we at least have to pay lip service to, are all out. So how does that influence, do you think, let's say now the Iranian-Russian relationship, and Iran knowing that it's next on the chopping block and probably, again, chopping from the head, right? The Israelis have been doing this, the Americans have been doing this, they're going after the head, right? Either by taking them out or by killing them with Nasrallah and others. So how do these regimes now, what do you think they will be doing?
Well, I think that when we're talking about Iran, is really, Pascal, we often talk about this idea of regime change. When we talk about Iran specifically, we're really talking about regime removal. Sort of similar to what we saw in Venezuela, but really that was just the removal of one man, because really at the end of the day, his government is still there and they're very angry. And you see people protesting on the streets now in Caracas. But in terms of Iran, the idea for Israel is maybe, to first and foremost remove the Islamic Republic, but then also maybe substitute it with, maybe bring in the Shah's son, as we know, or to kind of turn Iran into like a second Syria, where you have kind of breakaway republics, I don't know, in Kurdistan or Azerbaijan or in Khuzestan or in any number of places, Gilan, we can go on. But that would be, I think, kind of the idea. It's not necessarily regime removal, but the idea of making Iran so weak that it cannot pose a threat to Israel, because Israel's agenda for the whole region is really that there should be no potential competitor, to Israeli military supremacy in the region. That's really what we're seeing. And Iran, I think, already understood by the end of 2025 that there was going to be a new round, that Israel was making noise, this was going to happen. And so what I wrote in this most recent piece on Iran and Russia is that on December 17th, Mr. Araghchi and Mr. Lavrov met in Moscow, and they agreed on kind of, I guess you could say, like an insurance policy against this kind of new attacks. I mean, it was to really kind of help kind of shore up or, solidify even more so the Russian support for Iran in this moment, because as we know, as I spoke on earlier podcasts, on earlier episodes of your show, how crucial Iran is for BRICS and specifically for Russia and China.
Mm.
because you have to think about it as this great, node. I mean, the Iranian plateau as this great node on, as this great node on kind of, I guess you could say, the Silk Road, historically speaking. The idea of the One Belt, One Road project. If you look at its position in Eurasia, it connects kind of the post-Soviet South, that is to say, the former Soviet republics in the Caucasus and Central Asia, with China. It connects Russia with China. It's in this very strategic position. So if Iran was to be completely destabilized, if it was to become fragmented, if the Shah's son were to come in and install, let's say, a pro-Western, pro-Israel, pro-NATO government in Iran, then that would be a huge blow to the security of Russia and China, and a huge blow to BRICS, and a huge blow to the rise of multipolarity. So that's why this is so important, both for Moscow and Tehran. And what they agreed on December 17th was to intensify consultations between the foreign ministries, and to really kind of set the agenda for that for a period of 3 years. So this was really big. And also, if you listen to some of the statements that were made in this press conference, first and foremost, the idea about how, the international law is completely being tossed up by the United States. The idea that we're not going to take this anymore, coming from Russia and Iran, that we're not going to allow, the United States and the West to tear up the international order, and also including, by the way, the EU, because the EU attempted to, or actually reimposed sanctions on Iran, right? Russia and
Yeah.
China were against this idea, So there is this kind of assertion that we're not going to let this happen again, and that the United States will, that they should not feel this sense of impunity. This is the term Aragchi used, by the way. They should not feel the sense of impunity to do whatever they want. And we see clearly that sense of impunity has carried on into 2026 with this Venezuelan situation.
Do you think that Russia and China are now going to ignore the sanctions regime? Because the difference with the sanctions on Iran to the sanctions that are put on Russia is that the sanctions on Iran are actually UN sanctions, right? They were
Yeah.
taken, but at a moment when Russia and China did not oppose, kind of sanctioning Iran in case it tries to get the nukes. But we all understand by now that the United States is now using this tool, and the Europeans are using this tool. The fact that they have such a security council resolution in order to basically just undo all and any kind of approaches of the Iranians to somehow come to an understanding with the rest, right? Do you think that Russia will actually now just start ignoring the UN sanctions?
Oh, I think absolutely, and I wouldn't blame them in the same with the Chinese, because again, I mean, if Iran, because we're also seeing the way in which Israel is treating Iran. Iran came to the table, Pascal. It came to the table negotiating in good faith. They were willing to discuss the whole nuclear question. But you see who is really rogue in this case.
Of
It's
course.
the United States and Israel. I mean, look at
They
the way in
started
which
bombing Iran while still
I
pretending
know.
that they are negotiating. It's outrageous, but
It's absolutely outrageous. So I think that both Iran and I think that in terms of Iran and Russia, they're kind of preparing already. They already were, at least this was in December. They were already thinking like this. Now, from what I understand from my reports that I'm getting, actually this cooperation has intensified even more in light of recent developments in Iran, which we'll get to in a moment. But the idea is that I think Russia and China will absolutely not follow along with these sanctions. They're illegal sanctions,
by now, I mean,
and yeah.
the de jure they are actually legal because they're from the Security Council, but de facto
Mhm.
by now they they have become a very nasty tool just in the
Absolutely.
pressure box. But uh, one of the issues that we had that is kind of difficult for a lot of us to wrap our heads around is that it was the Iranians so far that resisted, for instance, doing a full military alliance with Russia. They were the ones who said, like, we are happy to do cooperation and collaboration, but no full alliance, no guarantees, mutual security guarantees.
And now I think they're rethinking that. They're rethinking that. And not only that, also, I mean, even it took a while for, the Iranian parliament to really ratify the strategic partnership, agreement. And actually, it was in the midst of the war that was solidified in the midst of the so-called 12-day war. But now the situation is changing. There have been large, cargo planes, military cargo planes flying from Russia to Iran, ready to kind of beef up Iran's, kind of support in advance of an imminent Israeli strike. I mean, this is not, I'm not even talking about, potential. We're talking about this is imminent. We're talking about days, hours. We're talking about something that could happen very soon.
But we've seen these protests now in Iran, right? And Donald Trump even saying if you kill protesters, then we're gonna attack you based upon just that. I mean, but it doesn't at this point it doesn't even matter.
Okay, let me just put the shoe. Pascal, I just want to put the shoe on the other foot. Okay, imagine.
Yeah.
If Pezeshkian were to issue a statement on Twitter saying, look at those protests in, let's say, in New York, against the genocide in Gaza, the pro-Palestine protests, right? If President Trump dares shoot at any protester there, that we will get involved, locked and loaded militarily in American affairs.
I know.
Can you imagine what would the reaction be in the American media if President Pezeshkian, had said something like
I know, but that's part now of the game, right? That the bully can threaten the bullied, and everybody just accepts that, right? But then what does that do? I mean, what do these protests actually mean? I cannot wrap my head around anymore anything, whether it's actually means something, whether there is a popular uprising, or if this just is another CIA sponsored kind of street protest which you can incite at any point in time.
Well, part of it is legitimate because there was, as we know, this massive inflation, and people in the Grand Bazaar in Tehran went out to protest, and you can understand why they feel the way they do. Right? So it's completely legitimate on one level. Also, I mean, we should also consider the fact that Iran, because of the sanctions, has had to become very agriculturally, self-sufficient. And this has also, had a strain on the water supply in Iran. So there's also kind of discontent there in terms of the water shortage. But that being said, genuine discontent is being taken advantage of by, not so innocent actors externally. And it's not just me saying that. It's not just speculation. It's the fact that Mossad even went so far as to publicly remark that we are encouraging these protests in Iran. And that's actually one of the most interesting things. Why would they be so public about it, right? And also, not only them, also Pompeo, made a big deal about this, right? The great neocon, thinker in the United States and Trump ally. And so the question becomes, why would Mossad be so overt about that? And I think part of it, Pascal, is psychological warfare. That in advance of this strike on Iran, in order to soften up Iran, the idea would be to kind of psych out Iran. And one of the ways you psych out Iran is by saying, look, you know what, we're so good and we're so great and we're so sophisticated, our intelligence services, that, we can get involved in your country at any time. We can, stir up the masses against your government at any time. And what can you do about it? Right. And it's an intimidation tactic. It's psychological warfare. So that's what we have to understand about this. It's not just that it's like, okay, yes, they're just bragging about it. There's also an element here of trying to intimidate Iran. So
Right.
that's how I see that, absolutely. And also you have to think about what this has the potential of doing. I mean, this is the potential of destabilizing the country and all that. But I think overall, Pascal, the vast majority of the people in Iran are not interested in overthrowing the government. They're not interested in bringing back the Shah's son. right? There were reports of a few maybe Iranian students who were being encouraged by
Yeah.
Mossad to bring back, the Shah's son. I can assure you that that is not in the cards. That's not going to happen. He doesn't even have that much. He doesn't even have that much support, even in the Iranian diaspora.
No, but you don't need that. You don't need a lot of support. We've seen it with how the US managed to get rid of Mr. Yanukovych in Ukraine and replace him with Mr. Poroshenko, who didn't have that much support. I mean, in the end, okay, there was a vote and whatnot, but later he was replaced by Zelensky, who was elected on a peace mandate. Let's not forget that. We see how they got rid of Mr. Maduro, who, whether he
Yes.
had popular support or not. I mean, what you need is you pay off a couple of people in the military and in the administration, apparently, plus shock and awe in intervention, and now they can say like great success. So this is the other intimidation for
What
Iran,
about
right? We're
Mr.
gonna
What about
we're
Mr.
gonna and
Yeah.
we're gonna kill you, by the way. We're not gonna take you out, we're gonna kill you. Um,
Yeah.
it's so why how do you think the Iranians are now going to try to approach this?
Well, one possibility is that they could do a preemptive strike.
Mhm. On who?
That's on Israel, because and that would not be on the U.S. I mean, but also the other question becomes, even if this, but we'll wait and see what happens. I'm not sure that they would go and do that. If they're a little bit, they're very cautious, right? I'm not sure necessarily they would go for that option, but if the war begins, then all bets are off. Now, also, it's important to highlight something else. If a new round begins, and actually it will begin most likely, the main target is not going to be the nuclear program. The main target is going to be Iran's ballistic missile program that wreaked so much havoc on Israel. And so the idea is to really kind of, again, make sure that there is no strategic competitor to Israel in the region, to really kind of knock out Iran's defenses. And that's really what I think the main target is going to be. Plus, also again, regime removal, really weakening the government. That would be kind of the objective. Now, what would Iran's response be at that point? I mean, especially if the U.S. is involved, they could hit a number of targets in the Persian Gulf, right? Because as we know, the U.S. has a lot of infrastructure there, military infrastructure there. And also, if the situation gets bad enough, Pascal, they could even close the Straits of Hormuz, as we
Yeah,
talked
but that
about.
would that would negatively impact China, which is something that I think
Yeah,
wouldn't really
that's
want to
that.
do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so they have to watch. Or no, what they could do is they could do a selective closure of the Straits of Hormuz. They could allow, the ships. They could, kind of make like an exception for the Chinese, but then not make an exception, let's say, for the West and for the U.S. So there are ways they can do this, but we'll wait and see what happens. And again, like I said, large cargo planes are coming in from Russia to Iran. We have also Putin, that he, in the past, I mean, this is one of the things that Aragchi said, that over the past, in this December 17th meeting, he said, over the past 18 months, that Pezeshkian met with Putin 5 times. And he said that that is not an insignificant number. So he's even underscoring that, because the other thing also you have to understand is that, I mean, that our viewers have to understand, is that there have been very, very deliberate efforts in the Western press to kind of make it look as if Russia and Iran have had some huge falling out, that their relations don't, that they're not jiving or whatever. And especially in the British media in particular, you see these kind of op-eds. And really what really what these Pezeshkian Putin meetings underscore, and really what Aragchi is underscoring, is how that don't doubt the depth of this relationship. This is a serious relationship. And we have the support of Russia, we have the support of China. Don't try anything. Right. So that's at least how I'm reading that.
Yeah, but I mean, this don't try anything. I don't think it really works. I mean, we've seen what happened to Bashar
Yeah.
al-Assad. I mean, obviously Israel is dreaming of pulling a huge Syria on Iran, right? And there was nothing Russia could do. Russia tried to support Assad. Russia tried to fight to shoot at the approaching hordes of al-Jolani, but it didn't help. It didn't help. I mean,
It didn't help, but I think Iran though is a beast completely, because when we're talking about Iran, we're talking about a country that is much more for Russia, of course, Syria, it's very important strategically, and as the Russians would say, in terms of, the jihadists in Syria, better fight them there than fight them here, because again, there's been a history of Islamist terrorism in Russia, in the Russian Federation. But I think the concern is that, especially for Russia, is that Iran is its security and its stability have much more direct implications on Russian security and stability. So if Iran became a Syria, it would be on Russia's doorstep, and the security implications for that would be, huge, especially because also it's adjoining the former Soviet republics in the Caucasus and Central Asia. There are common issues there, which they reiterated, by the way, in this press
Yeah.
conference. They talked about their kind of opposition to external actors coming into the region, right? It's not so much a big deal. There is, of course, efforts to kind of infiltrate into Central Asia, but the more immediate threat for Russia and Iran now is the Caucasus region. Specifically, when we had this so-called TRIP agreement, this Trump corridor idea, this Zangezur corridor idea, as it was previously known, that would link Turkey with Azerbaijan through Armenia, and Pashinyan, as we know, in Armenia is, more than okay with this. He's not exactly, the most, how do I put this, the most loyal Armenian, right? And his popularity in Armenia, by the way, I can tell you this based on my observations here, it's sinking like a rock. I don't exclude that he's going to kind of attempt to rig the next election, which is coming up in June.
I mean,
But yeah.
he's jailing people in Armenia, right? He's jailing opposition figures, and he's making sure that anyone who could be politically dangerous to him is going to go away. That's going on right now, still, right?
Including the church. He's going after the church very hard. In fact, he's now declaring, an effort to reform the church. But this actually, the deeper he goes in this issue, he really thinks that he can, achieve what he wants to achieve if he pushes that hard enough. But in fact, actually, it's creating the opposite effect. And really, people are really beginning to push back against him for the first time, really, in a significant way on this. I mean, before people were pushing back, but it was not kind of a decisive, a mass of people, I guess you could say. But now it's really, generating a lot of resentment, what
Can
he's
you
doing with the church.
can you update me a little bit also about TRIP? I mean, the Trump, what is it, regional international
No, the Trump route for international peace and prosperity, something like this. Yeah.
this thing that's supposed to link in the end Azerbaijan with Turkey, right? On the other end, this corridor. If this thing they signed it in Washington, but in order for this to become an actual treaty, it of course needs to be ratified by the other Armenian parliament as well. So is that moving anywhere? Is it to become an actual proper
No,
treaty?
we
At
don't
this moment,
even.
it's only an letter of intent, right?
It's only a letter of intent, and there's no specifics on it. And what we do know is that, Pashinyan is all for the idea of leasing these southern this corridor in the southern Armenian province of Sunik, to lease it for 99 years to a private American company. That's the whole idea. That's
It
what
would be
Trump is
so
trying to do.
dumb, but yeah, it's
Is it be extremely dumb, but this is what he's all in for.
but he cannot do it alone. He needs Parliament to ratify, right?
He
So, and
needs
is
Parliament to ratify.
do you know
I
how the
but it's no,
majorities
it's
are?
not even. It hasn't even it hasn't even gotten to that discussion yet, Pascal. So we don't even know the details of it. We don't even know the specifics of even this private American company that would be, governing something like this. It's still very vague, even this late in the game. And so I don't foresee it coming to fruition anytime soon. But still, nevertheless, that should not make it necessarily less threatening to the interests of Russia and Iran. Russia, in the past month, in December, has become very vocal in its opposition to TRIP. And they said if there's going to be any corridor there, we have to be running it, right?
Okay.
We have to be that we have to be, our troops have to be, in charge there, right? And that this should not be like an extraterritorial corridor that would be outside of Armenian administration, that this would be under Armenian law, and that the Russian troops would be there, you know. But of course, TRIP would technically exclude the Russians. So now you can already see that Russia is becoming quite vocal about that. And as we know, Iran does not like this at all. Because what would happen then if you have this, how would they feel about, an American private company having influence right there on Iran's northern border, where also, Israel could be involved in a lot of, very questionable activities already. When we talk about Karabakh, as I mentioned in one of these articles I wrote in the past, how really these areas of Karabakh that had been adjoining Iran, that had been along the Iranian border, that were taken back by Azerbaijan. What happened? Azerbaijan gave them to basically gave them over to Israel. They allowed the Israeli intelligence to operate in these districts now.
So are you afraid that, Pashinyan and the United States at some point might just create facts? Because I think what we're seeing right now is that they just do whatever they can. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point Pashinyan popped up in Washington again, signed a piece of paper, and the next day you have like 200 contractors, a day later 400, and one more day later 600, including military personnel of the United States that are just show up and then say like, you want to get rid of us, you would have to bomb us out of there, and then just start making that corridor without actually going through the formal processes and whatnot. Is that something that worries you?
It somewhat does, but it's not really a main issue because I can tell you, based on what I'm observing here in Yerevan, that there is some distance growing between Pashinyan and his Western backers. So,
Mm.
for example, if you look at, like, for example, the Azatutun, which is the Armenian branch of Radio for Europe, Radio Liberty, all of a sudden the coverage of Pashinyan is very negative,
Oh, really?
which is really, really quite interesting. Yeah, yeah. And also, I'm getting other very reliable reports that the United States increasingly is dissatisfied with Pashinyan.
Mm.
Plus, also, you have to consider something else, some objective facts, because Pashinyan was recently, he got this, as I mentioned in my most recent article about Russia and Iran, by the way, that he got some boost, he got some support from the EU. I mean, Kaya Kallas
Mhm.
made this remarks that, we will support you financially in your reelection bid to kind of combat disinformation and so on and so forth, and kind of replicate the Moldovan scenario in Armenia. But there are very serious differences between Moldova and Armenia. Sure, there are a lot of similarities in terms of size. It's an ex-Soviet republic, as we know, and all this. But first of all, Moldova is a much it's much closer physically to the EU. The president of Romania, former president of Romania, Basescu, actually you know kind of push forth. He kind of advanced this effort to kind of make Moldovans Romanian citizens.
Mhm.
And so what we end up having now is a large Moldovan diaspora in Europe that has been allowing or has been kind of enabling Sandu to kind of become the president and all this kind of a thing. But there isn't that dynamic in the case of Armenia. There is a large Armenian diaspora, as we know, very famous large Armenian diaspora, but even within that diaspora, there's a lot of opposition to Pashinyan. And not every Armenian in the diaspora is an Armenian citizen who can vote in the elections. So that's one thing. The other thing also is the fact that the Armenian economy is so dependent on the Russian economy.
Mm.
It's so integrated with the Russian economy that it would be very hard to pull Armenia out of this kind of Eurasian sphere. It would be extremely difficult to do that. So between that, because even if Pashinyan said overnight, let's get rid of the Russians and let's I don't know, integrate with Turkey and Azerbaijan and the West and all this, in the interim there would be extraordinary economic disruptions, which would almost certainly spell his end immediately if he was to pursue such a policy. So I think there was a realization in Washington that this is almost a bridge too far, that we can only push so far here, and that maybe we should concentrate our resources somewhere else or something like this. I don't know. We'll see how it all develops. But
Right.
that's kind of my kind of, and also this is also you have to think corresponding with rising, very sharp opposition to Pashinyan in Armenian society. Throughout the Armenian society, people are really, really increasingly, fed up with him.
Okay,
So do see
so
that as well.
in a sense, like there in the Caucasus at the moment, it looks as if there's going to be a little bit more calm, at least not the storm that seems to be brewing seems not to be coming from there at the moment. So it's probably going to be I mean, whatever's going to come is going to come directly at Iran from Israel for sure, right? Not some further encircling of Iran that you would expect.
I definitely think that that's the case, but also, of course, there are also proxies of Israel. I mean, we look at Azerbaijan, in the last war, in this so-called 12-day war, Azerbaijan was kind of used as like a launching pad for Israel into Iran. But, President Aliyev needs to be careful because, I mean, he's been kind of, very, boastful after his conquest of Nagorno-Karabakh. And he has been very brazen in his attitudes toward Moscow and Tehran. And I think, though, he can only go so far. And he's a country that's hemmed in between two much larger powers. And, he will push his luck. But at some point, I mean, he's got to realize there's only so far you can go. I mean, he might say, I'm a great middle power. I'm a great, maybe even a great power in the Caucasus or something, a superpower in the Caucasus. He might even go so far as to say. But the reality is that he's a small country and he's hemmed in between a large regional power to the south, which is Iran, and a superpower to the north, which is Russia. And in that scenario, Israel and the United States can only help so much. Turkey can only help so much. And so, he can only, I think that if he was smart, which I question, I don't think, I don't think it would be wise. I'll put it that way. I don't think it would be wise to push, these much larger countries and to see what you can get away with, right? To push and to see how far you can go and to push and see how far you can go. And that's been his game, right? But we'll see how this all, turns out.
What do you
But I think that Israel is going to try different ways to kind of needle Iran. It's not just going to be one, like a direct hit from Israel to Iran.
what do you think the role of Turkey is going to be in the next round with between Israel, the United States, and Iran? I mean, Turkey at this point has been playing a very duplicitous role in the entire game in the region over the last 20 years under Mr. One. But it has no, as far as I can tell, Turkey has no interest, would have zero interest in Israel actually properly defeating Iran.
And also we have to think too, I mean, as much as, Israel, I mean, as much as when we talk about, um, an Israeli assault on Iran and destabilization of Iran, right? From the point of view of some Turkish nationalists, right? If there was an independent Iranian Azerbaijan, they might like this or whatever. But at the end of the day, I also think that it could also create an independent Kurdistan. There would be also new problems for Turkey as well if there was a scenario like this. Regional destabilization that would be very, very, that would have very, very negative security implications for Turkey. And Turkey would not want this. Plus, also, there's the opposition in Turkey, as you know, as I know, as everybody knows, in the Turkish society to what Israel is doing in Gaza.
Yeah. And let's I mean I suppose a lot of people have noticed by now that Israel always finds a next enemy, right? If it's not Iraq, it's
Yes.
Iran. And the nature of the Israeli project, of the settler colonial project of expanding its territory all the time, right? Going into the next slither, going into Syria, the Golan Heights, going into the buffer zone, and then making the buffer zone a part, and then creating another buffer zone. You will hit if they eliminate Iran, they will have the next problem. The next one they're gonna seriously clash with is Turkey. There is no other one, and they will do that, and they will go and claim what Turkey currently occupies in Syria. They already
And it's not only, it's not only that in terms of, let's say, how would I say this? It's not only that in terms of the greater Israel, kind of geopolitical idea. It's also, Pascal, this notion of Israel not wanting to have any country in the region, um, possess some kind of military superiority, right? The idea that Israel would have to be the preeminent military power in the region, and they couldn't stand for anybody to be in the way of that. So if Iran is taken out, then the next logical step would be, as you say, Turkey. And also, I mean, it depends on what happens with Egypt domestically. Right now with Sisi, Israel has no problem because, you know, Sisi is basically a puppet at the end of the day. But the idea is that nobody should, you know, even think of raising their hand against us. That would be the idea coming
No, no,
from
not
Israel.
just raising the hands, but even just not serve Israel, right? The only kind of partnership it accepts is subserviency, right? Where you deliver cheap
Absolutely.
labor for the white European apartheid state that then governs the region, just like the United States doesn't accept anyone who in South America who's not subservient to them, right? That's what they're making clear right now. It is clear
Yeah,
hierarchy. You serve, you live.
absolutely.
You stop serving, you die. And the Turks cannot like this very much, seeing how this
No,
goes
the
on.
Turks cannot like it very, and also the Turks, you know, I mean, as we also know, I mean, there's been kind of an off and on cooperative relationship with Israel there too, because again, you know, Aliyev is, you know, or he's supporting the Israeli war machine with his, you know, energy supplies to Israel, and that's going through Turkey. So there's some questions there at the end of the day, and also as we know, Syria, they kind of like, you know, split that up like a pie, you know, and then that was kind of their, you know,
That was that. Yeah.
that was that. But I think that you're right that Turkey better watch out because if Iran is taken out, then who is next in line?
Hmm. And
You know?
there's no NATO that could protect you. There's no NATO that can
No,
protect you against Israel. I mean, there's nothing under the sun that the United States wouldn't kill in order to prop up the Israeli project. But maybe as just a last kind of complex, the Europeans. What's your take at their role in this region now under these new premises of the 2026 kind of we're back to the 19th century world? Because on the one hand they have very big mouths, on the other hand they have nothing to deliver.
well, they have a very loud bark, but they have no bite at all. Right? It's not even this idea that, you know, the bark is worse than the bite because there's no bite. Really, and at the end of the day, the other problem with the EU is that all of the statements that come out of the EU are all, you know, basically echoing the statements that come out of Washington. There's no independent agency there, Pascal. And there's an increasing gulf in terms of crisis. There's an increasing gulf between the European elites and the populations of Europe. I don't know when that's going to come to a head, but that's not going to last forever,
Hmm.
right? If there's one thing we know about, I mean, you can speak to this as a European yourself, um, that if there's one constant in the history of Europe, it's change, right?
Yeah.
There's always been, I mean, there have been rises, we've seen the rise of empires, the fall of empires, you know, going throughout history. You know, we talk about Rome, right? We talk about, you know, the upheavals of World War One, and you know, we can go on with the whole history. So I think this is cyclic. I don't think that these, you know, bureaucratic elites are going to be there forever, but I do see a future where the EU breaks up. So they're talking about the breakup of Iran. They really want the breakup of Iran, but I think in the end, what's more likely to happen is because I think Iran, what's going to happen is Israel is going to attempt to do a strike. There's going to be a new round, but I don't think it's going to end in because they think that it can end in Iran being fragmented or being broken up or becoming like a new Syria or something like this. But I think that what will more likely happen is we're going to more likely see the EU itself break up. Same thing also, by the way, with Russia. Kaya Kallas made the statement. She wanted to break up Russia into different republics, right? That was her objective. And I think more likely we're going to see the EU break up.
Yeah, it's like
Uh,
yeah,
and so,
at the end of the day, I think, this coming from somebody who is merely a kind of a figurehead of a glorified economic union made out of 27 member countries, not member
mhm,
republics, member countries. It's just shines through how these people haven't understood that they're the ones sitting in the glass house. Um,
absolutely.
but
Well, also, you know, I like what I like is how you always like liken the EU to like the USSR. You make these kind of parallels. Specifically, I think it's a lot like the late USSR, right? It's
Yeah.
like
Oh
in
yeah.
Russian, there is this term like zastoy, right? It's like a stagnation. Like when we talk about Brezhnev, the period of Brezhnev and Chernenko and these kind of guys, this is what we're really into right now in the EU, right? We're into a zastoy, we're into a stagnation. And soon, what follows after that? If we follow this, the pattern of the Soviet history, there was an attempt at reform under Gorbachev, and then there was, eventually dissolution. I think the EU probably isn't even going to go for the attempt for reform. I think they're just going to dissolve. I mean, the way they're going.
The dumb thing about the Europeans right now is that they think the Russians are not Europeans. Therefore, any kind of Russian experience can be discarded, and this would never come back to us. It's like, come on, we've had a union.
Absolutely.
We've had a union on the continent, and it broke apart for the same reasons that you're currently being in the
Yeah.
process of breaking
And
apart.
Kaya Kallas should know that better than anybody else because Estonia was part of that union.
And
I mean,
I
her
keep
own
repeating,
father.
I keep repeating that time and again. Kaya Kallas, is the Soviet-born daughter
Yeah,
of a communist apparatchik. And
yeah.
that's the
So she
person
should
who
know.
now runs the place. It's like, the Europeans don't
It's
know
like
each other.
everything going back full circle, Pascal. That's what we're dealing with here.
You couldn't make it up. You couldn't make
No,
it
you
up if
couldn't.
you
It's
tried.
impossible. Yeah.
Um, and I also must say, like I've been saying that for 10 years in my classes, usually, like the question in Europe, as you pointed out, is not if borders change. The question is whether they change with or without violence. That's the only question, but they change naturally. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
we are currently in a period where the peaceful change of borders, velvet divorce of Czechoslovakia, or the Brexit, actually, where that seems to be over. So we're back to the violent version, which doesn't bode very well for Europe because
No. And it's being facilitated, by the way, by the European elites because, the European elites are watching in real time, whether it's, I mean, the UK, which is not, as we know, it's not in the EU anymore, but the UK, I don't know, von der Leyen or Kaya Kallas basically endorsing what Trump is doing with Venezuela. I mean, when you're endorsing really the law of the jungle, when you're endorsing the dismantlement of international law, what do you expect is going to happen? That's eventually going to come back and hit you.
can I,
You might think you're immune to that, but you know what?
can I tell you?
Europeans are just as human as anybody else, and it's
Can I
going to,
tell
gonna
you?
come back.
Can I tell you what he saw this morning in German Twitter? Uh,
What?
Actually, that was not only German Twitter. That was last night in the German like evening news. The main ARD, I think, the first the big channel of the Germans. They interviewed this. I forgot his name. He's a complete utter idiot. So I try not. I can't remember his name, but they interviewed that guy about what the intervention in Venezuela means, and then the anchor actually she asked, well, if Trump now went into Venezuela to take that guy out, could it be that he will come through on his threat of taking Greenland, which he already said, and might he do that? And then this utter idiot who just said like, oh, he kind of did a good thing by taking that guy out because he was a bad man. He said like, the Monroe Doctrine only refers to the Western Hemisphere, and Greenland is part of Europe, therefore it doesn't pertain to that.
What? A complete idiot. Does he even know basic
news
geography?
Germany. They're
Does he even know basic I can't, but I did tell that really actually, tells me of the decline of the American, or excuse me, the European elites. And I made a kind of a Freudian slip there because I was also thinking that, one of the big problems in the US is they had for many years, and all you have to do is just watch, I don't know, Jimmy Kimmel or one of these late night shows. Has been that Americans have become increasingly geographically challenged, right? They don't know like where Greenland is versus Ukraine versus, I don't know, Iran, and so now I guess that's extending to Europe because as we can see, they don't even know that Greenland is part of the Western Hemisphere. Maybe I guess they assume it's part of
I
continental
suppose
Europe.
he meant that it's part of the EU, therefore it's safe. I have no idea. I mean, but that's the kind of people they interview in the evening news. I mean, no wonder that the Europeans are kind of completely out of their depths. I mean, the propaganda is now eating itself, right? It's eating its own people.
Well, and I also think that they've taught themselves, the European elite specifically, they've taught themselves a fairy tale that they now believe. Like you're saying, I mean, when Mr. Borrell said, oh yes, the whole world is a jungle and Europe's a garden, right? As if nothing can affect us here in Europe, right?
That
at the end of
racist
the
thing,
day,
yeah.
yeah, that racist thing. But you know what? At the end of the day, the Europe is just as susceptible to these Trump's you know, violations of international law as anybody else. So like I always say, like, Denmark, they might not want to part with Greenland, but if Trump wants Greenland, what can they do? And it's a big issue. I mean, what we're seeing is the decline of the so-called European dream. I mean, whatever that was. But I think Europe somehow will come back from this, Pascal. I think the people are wiser than the elites. The problem is that the elites are extraordinarily undemocratic. For all their rhetoric about democracy and human rights and European values, whatever those are, they are really not democratic at all. I mean, who elected von der Leyen? Well, that's the question I have to
Well,
ask you. I mean, yeah.
that's the only point where I would push back a little bit because who elected Merz, who elected
Ah, yes.
I mean, in a parliamentary
Macron.
democracy, that's just how it works. So I would leave that one aside a little bit. It's like, the parliamentary election process did work. It's just the whole system is a scam in the way who it produces. But the,
Yes,
the the
absolutely.
the legitimacy is there. I mean, at least on paper.
And also look at also Macron in France. I mean, that's another one who's just completely out of his depth.
Yeah, that one
You
was
know,
elected, unfortunately.
I
So.
know that, yeah. So straight to your
But
point.
but but then again, you go to a prisoner on death row and tell him, do you want to hang or do you want to be shot? And then, oh, you selected it, right? I mean, why do you complain? So it's more that kind of problem. It's
I
what
agree
kind of
with you.
selection you're being
Absolutely.
given.
Yeah, absolutely, Pascal. Unfortunately, you're absolutely correct. So,
Maybe very last thing, what do you think? What are you looking out for now at the very beginning of 2026 that you think people should keep an eye on?
oh, definitely keep an eye on Iran, because that's going to be the next big conflict, and that's going to be the next big attempt, I guess you could say, at regime change, regime removal, whatever. And, if Israel and the United States are successful in doing this, it's going to have massive, strategic implications for BRICS and for Eurasia, I think, at the end of the day. But also, I would not discount the fact that in some ways, the impact of this Venezuela issue, how this kind of very flagrant violation of international law by the United States, and it's almost even an understatement to say flagrant because it really was quite terrible, how this is going to make more countries, kind of, approach America in a much more cautious way. And what I'm trying to say is that this was a watershed moment by which the American soft power is, if it already been declining in recent years, it really has, now reached its kind of its bottom point. That now people, no longer are going to, buy into this rhetoric of democracy and liberty or whatever that's coming from the United States, because they'll say, well, this is just being used to justify, these imperialistic, adventures abroad and all this and that, and this is not, serious, and this is not, real liberty or real democracy or anything like this. So it's a watershed moment in the way in which the world perceives. Because you can say, oh, right now in Venezuela, you can say, okay, what is Russia's reaction? What's China's reaction? What's the BRICS reaction to this? What are they going to do? They're limited in what they can do, and so on and so forth. But look at the reaction on the streets all throughout the world. Look at the reaction coming from Mexico, from Colombia, from Cuba, from all these different countries in Latin America, toward the United States. And Trump, again, true to his fashion, has even threatened to invade Mexico,
And Colombia.
from what I can see, and Colombia. Yeah. And so, I think that this is a watershed moment in terms of the perception of the U.S. in the world, and that's also going to make the world more alert to issues such as Iran, and also Palestine. That's a big one because, the fact that the United States is co-signing a genocide, and actually it's participating in a genocide in Gaza,
Yeah.
that also deals at a huge blow in terms of its international credibility. So between that and Venezuela and also Iran, going into a second round with Iran, all of this is going to be hurting the United States and its international reputation.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So the moment you have to use hard power is the moment when you admit that soft power failed. So that thing is already peeled away and probably gone for good.
Yeah.
People would probably start burning blue jeans if they weren't all made in
Or
China,
McDonald's. Yeah.
Bangladesh by now. But the that one is gone for good, and the mask is kind of off for good now. And I mean, Biden still tried to keep the mask on, and that one's being, completely removed. So it's a little bit more clarity, although that doesn't help very much against the violence, but it's more clarity.
It is. And I think also, a lot of people were saying, and basically, when we look back at, when Trump was first elected in his first term in 2016, there were people who were saying, well, really the main difference between Trump and, let's say, Obama is that the mask is off, right? Well, we can say now, after Biden, the mask is truly off. I mean, if you can't see it now, you're blind. I mean, that's really what we're dealing with here. Yeah.
That's how my next Substack article is going to be like Blind Man Europe, because they're the ones who still pretend that everything's fine because they touch the mask and the guy stands over there. But good, Pietro, thank you very much. That was a fairly wide-ranging talk. People who want to follow you, where should they go?
Well, I'm writing for regularly for the American Committee for East-West Accord, but I also do articles for the Realist Review, which is edited by James Carden. So if they go to Substack and they go type in the Realist Review, they will find that publication there. Plus, also, as you know, I've written a book on Anastas Mikoyan and his reforms during the Khrushchev period, during the Khrushchev thaw. It's called Anastas Mikoyan, an Armenian reformer in Khrushchev's Kremlin, published by Indiana University Press. So I would advise you definitely to check that out. And yeah, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, Pascal, in beginning in 2016, we'll see maybe the beginning of some sense coming back to the Europeans. That's really my hope. But it remains to be seen. I mean, because how can you had again these elites, the European elites, oppose the American invasion of Iraq? That actually is that's a good contrast. When you had Chirac and Schroeder together with Putin opposing the war in Iraq, something changed between then and now. When you have Kaya Kallas and von der Leyen and all these people saying, "Oh yes, Trump going into Venezuela, that was a good thing for democracy," or something like that. So something along the way, they became kind of like, I guess you could say,
They
I guess neoconservatized or
no,
something like this.
no, the Americans ramped up their transatlantic network project. I mean, they just get
Yeah, they
better
did.
heads in, right? And this transatlantic network is deep, it's old, and it's relatively large, and the talent pool is also still available. So I don't see that changing soon. And funnily enough, you had a little slip there because you said 2016. And if it was 2016, I would actually agree. I would say like there's still hope in Europe recovering, but by 2026, I must just say I don't know. I mean, they still don't see it. They still
No, they don't see it. And also something else. So I want to just add something else, which is really quite interesting. If you were looking at think tank papers coming out of the United States, coming out of Washington,
Mm.
in the years of the Iraq War, there was already discussion when they saw Chirac and
Your audio just cut off. Your audio is just gone. Just gone. Just no more audio. Pietro, I don't hear you, but you know what? Maybe we take this as a sign from God and we do the fade out. It's like 1 hour has been over. Um,
Can you hear me now?
yes, I hear you. I hear you again.
Okay, no, I just wanted to say one thing, that if you look at these think tank papers coming out of the United States in the period of the Iraq War, there were discussions. They felt that Chirac and Schroeder were acting too independently, and they felt that the problem is that Europe, if Europe becomes too independent like this, it can become a strategic competitor to the United States, and we can't allow that. So Europe has to be, there was this idea that Europe has to be subordinated, or it has to be kind of, resubordinated maybe to the United States. That has to be emphasized that we are the dominant player here. So I think that the Iraq War, and that's why I mentioned that, that was an important moment by which the many people in the American elite thought, you know, this is that we need to kind of rein in Europe.
Yeah.
And so we see the culmination of that today, unfortunately. So
Everybody, the works of Pietro Shakarian should be in the description box below. Pietro, thank you very much for your time today.
thank you very much, Pascal. Pleasure being here. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.